A war hero HUMILIATED Jerry Lewis on live TV. What happens next will shock you. The cameras were rolling live on America's most beloved telethon when a decorated Marine Corps colonel, his uniform a tapestry of wartime sacrifice, turned to the exhausted king of comedy Jerry Lewis and did the unthinkable. He publicly eviscerated him, calling his life's work vanity, and the man himself a disgrace. What happened in the shattered silence that followed? As 30 million viewers watched a shattered icon decide how to respond, would redefine both men's legacies and become a haunting lesson in the price of ego and the power of radical humility. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this one, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow's story is even more special for you. On air. Sign blazed like a warning beacon in Studio 33 at CBS Television City. A silent sentinel to the emotional ambush about to unfold on one of the most watched shows in America. It was the night of October 6, 1972, and the air in the studio crackled not with the usual anticipation of comedy, but with a thick, unspoken tension. On one side of the iconic Jerry Lewis telethon stage sat the host himself, Jerry Lewis, a man whose face was as recognizable as the map of America. A comet of comedy who had spent the last 22 hours straight weaving laughter and pleas for donations to fight muscular dystrophy. His trademark tuxedo was rumpled, his eyes were caverns of exhaustion, but a performer's manic energy still coursed through him, fueled by adrenaline and the millions of dollars pledged for his kids. He was a king in his kingdom. A ruler of laughter whose every sigh and grin was mirrored by a crew of hundreds and measured by the climbing numbers on the tote board. Across from him, a man of a completely different dimension waited in the guest chair. This was Colonel John, Jack, R.T. Pembroke, United States Marine Corps, retired. At 48, Pembroke carried the weight of 3 wars on his broad shoulders and in the slight, permanent stoop of his spine. His uniform was a landscape of valor. The Navy Cross hung at its center, awarded for actions at the Chosin Reservoir in Korea, where he'd led a fighting retreat through a blizzard of Chinese fire, saving 70 men while frostbite claimed 2 of his own toes. Flanking it were 2 silver stars, one from Korea, one from the bloody hills of Kyosan in Vietnam, and a purple heart with 3 clusters, a brutal arithmetic of shrapnel and sacrifice. He had been invited as hero of the hour, a segment designed to lend gravitas to the telethon's final stretch, and the producers hoped to open the wallets of patriotic viewers. Pembroke was not a performer. He was a monument. His hands, scared and thick, rested on his knees, and his gaze was not on the cheering audience, but on a fixed point in the middle distance, as if still scanning a distant tree line for threat. He had come not for fame, but out of a sense of duty to a cause that helped children, a cause he believed was unassailably good. He was utterly unprepared for the circus he had entered, for the frantic, jarring rhythm of a telethon, where tragedy and jest were partners in a dizzying dance. Jerry Lewis, riding a wave of sleepless euphoria, introduced his guest with his characteristic, sprawling energy. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a real American hero with us, a man who has given more than most of us can even imagine. Please welcome Colonel John Pembroke. The audience erupted in respectful, thunderous applause. Pembroke stood, gave a sharp, brief nod, and sat back down. Lewis, leaning forward, began the interview not with a question about heroism, but with a comedian's instinct to puncture solemnity. So, Colonel, those medals heavy, huh? Must make it tough to do the jitterbug. The audience chuckled. Pembroke offered a thin, polite smile. They're a reminder, sir. Not a burden. Lewis, missing, or ignoring, the nuance plowed ahead. A reminder, I get it. Like my reminder to never wear a tuxedo for 24 hours straight. Itchy. More laughter. Lewis was in his mode, playing to the room, trying to keep the energy manic in the phones ringing. But as he continued, his questions began to skate on the edge of propriety. No, Colonel. Seriously, all that time in the mud, in the cold, did you ever just want to say, forget it, and watch a few cartoons? Maybe catch a Jerry Lewis movie. The latter was more nervous now. Pembroke's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Our focus was on the mission, Mr. Lewis. On the men to our left and right. There wasn't time for cartoons. Sensing he wasn't getting the good-natured hero banter he wanted, Lewis shifted, a glint of something harder entering his exhausted eyes. The telethon was a marathon of controlled chaos, and Lewis was its absolute dictator. Any element that resisted his control was a threat to the delicate machine. He decided to go for a bigger laugh, to break what he saw as the Colonel's stoic shell.
Mission. Right.
See, that's the difference between us. Your mission was to follow orders. My mission here, he said, sweeping his arm across the vast set, is to get people to open their hearts and their wallets. And let me tell you, Colonel, sometimes that's a tougher fight than any war. You get the bullets, I get the busy signals. The audience roared, their loyalty entirely to their exhausted, beloved Jerry. This was his house. Pembroke's face went from stoic to stone. The camera closed in on him, and 30 million viewers saw the transformation. The polite mask fell away, revealing the flint beneath. Lewis, emboldened by the laugh, made his fatal error. He leaned in, putting a hand on Pembroke's shoulder in a conspiratorial gesture. But hey, we're both in the service business, right? You serve your country. I serve the laughs. He gave the Colonel's shoulder a little shake. Simon, give us a smile for the kids. Let them see the hero has a sense of humor. For a second, the studio was silent, the air vacuumed out by the sheer, breathtaking awkwardness of the moment. Then Colonel John Pembroke did what no guest on the each Jerry Lewis telethon had ever done. He slowly, deliberately reached up and removed Jerry Lewis's hand from his shoulder as if it were a piece of debris. He leaned into his own microphone, his voice not a shout, but a low, gravelly rumble that carried the weight of frozen mountains and burning jungles, a voice that cut through the studio chatter like a bayonet through silk. Mr. Lewis, he began, and the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. You speak of service, you speak of fights. He paused, his eyes locking onto Lewis's, holding the comedian in a gaze that had frozen enemy soldiers. I have buried 19-year-old boys who had their legs blown off. I have written letters to mothers explaining that their sons died in a muddy ditch for a cause their country asked them to believe in. I have held a man's intestines in my hands while he cried for his mother. The studio was now a tomb. The crew stood frozen. The audience sat in paralyzed horror. You speak of busy signals. Pembroke continued, his voice gaining a terrible, measured momentum. I have listened to the sound of a man choking on his own blood. You sell laughter. I have purchased security for this nation with the currency of suffering and sacrifice that you, in your shiny shoes and your fancy tuxedo, could never comprehend. Do not ever equate what you do here with what my men did. This, he said, with a dismissive flick of his hand at the glittering set, the dancing girls waiting in the wings, the giant tote board, is not service. This is vanity. This is a man playing dress up as a saint while making jokes about things he will never, ever understand. He turned fully to face Lewis, who had shrunk back into his host's chair, his face a mask of white shock. You want a smile for your camera? Find a clown. I am a United States Marine. And you, sir, are a disgrace to the very concept of duty you pretend to champion. The silence that followed was atomic in its totality. It was the sound of 30 million Americans holding their breath. The camera, trapped on the wide shot, showed Jerry Lewis utterly shattered. His mouth was slightly open, his eyes wide and glistening. The confident king of comedy was gone, replaced by a small, exposed boy publicly flayed by a truth he could not refute. The own AR, light still burned, a cruel eye broadcasting his annihilation to the nation. In control rooms, producers were in panic, hands hovering over switches, but hypnotized into inaction by the sheer, historic car crash unfolding. This was not in the script. This was a guided missile striking the heart of the Jerry Lewis myth. For 22 hours, Lewis had been the maestro of emotion, orchestrating tears and laughter with a conductor's baton. Now, in 60 seconds, Colonel Pembroke had revealed the orchestra to be a child's toy and the maestro to be a man in a costume, his baton a silly stick. The colonel did not wait for a response. He stood, gave one final, searing look at the paralyzed host, turned on his heel with parade, ground precision, and walked off the set, his medals clicking a faint, metallic requiem. The stage was left with Jerry Lewis, alone under the hot lights, the echo of the word, disgrace, hanging in the air like poison gas. What happened in the commercial break that followed became the stuff of television legend. The studio was a vortex of chaos. Network executives screamed into phones. Telethon producers, loyal to Jerry, were shouting that Pembroke should be arrested for sabotage. Lewis's personal handlers and writers surrounded him. A protective wall of panic. Jerry were cutting the feed. His director hissed in his ear. "We'll say you had a medical episode. A sudden vertigo. The public will believe it, pot." His head writer was frantically scripting a joke to recover. "We can come back and say the colonel was part of a new improv bit. The grumpy hero. We can salvage this." Jerry Lewis said nothing. He stared at the empty guest chair as if it were a smoking crater. The colonel's words were not just an insult. They were a demolition. They had bypassed the persona of Jerry Lewis and struck the core of Jerry Levitch, the kid from Newark who had built an empire on being loved, on being seen as the good guy, the guy who cared so much he worked himself to exhaustion for his kids. The word, disgrace, echoed in his soul. He saw the faces of the Marines he had entertained in USO shows decades earlier. He remembered the awkward, profound silence that would sometimes follow a silly bit when he'd look into the eyes of young men about to ship out. He had always packaged it as giving them a laugh before the tough stuff. Pembroke had just ripped that package open and shown him the condescension inside. "Jerry, talk to me," his producer pleaded. "What's the play?" "We're back in 90 seconds. Lewis looked up, his eyes clearing for the first time in nearly a day. The manic energy was gone, burned away in the crucible of humiliation. In its place was something raw, unfamiliar, and terrifying quiet clarity. "No medical episode," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. "No joke. We go on alone." When the on-AR light glowed red once more, America watched, transfixed, to see how the humiliated king would respond. Would he rage? Would he spin a comedic defense? Would he break down in tears? Jerry Lewis walked slowly back to center stage. The orchestra did not play a fanfare. The dancers did not appear. He stood alone in a single spotlight. The empty chair beside him a stark monument to the confrontation. He looked directly into the camera, his face drained of all its famous rubbery expression. He looked, for the first time in his public life, completely real. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice quiet, stripped of all performative flair. "Before we continue with our mission tonight, and it is a mission, I need to say something." He took a deep, shuddering breath that was audible on the mic. "Colonel Pembroke, if you are still watching, I owe you an apology. A profound and heartfelt apology." The studio audience murmured in shock. A public apology from Jerry Lewis was unheard of. He was always in the right. His sentimentality was his shield. "You came onto my show as an honored guest," Lewis continued, his words slow, deliberate, as if each one cost him dearly. "You came with a lifetime of service and sacrifice. And I treated you as a bit, as a piece of business in my show. I made light of things that should never be made light of. I equated my exhaustion with your pain, my busy signals with the sounds of war. That was not just wrong. That was immoral." He paused, swallowing hard, his eyes glistening under the lights. This was not the telethon staged, sentimental cry. This was the tremor of genuine, painful self-awareness. "Colonel, you said I was playing dress up as a saint." Lewis's voice broke. "And for a long time. Maybe I have been. I built this thing," he said, waving at the set. "Because I wanted to help. I wanted to be a good man. But somewhere along the way, Jerry Lewis the brand ate Jerry Levitch the person. I started believing my own publicity. I started thinking that because I was fighting a good fight, that made good. That my way was the only way. That laughter was the only currency that mattered." He walked over to the guest chair and put a hand on its back. "You sat here. And you represented something I don't have. Something I can't buy with a punchline or a pratfall. You have integrity. A consistency of character that exists without an audience, without a laugh track, without a camera to see it. You have a moral compass forged in fire, not focus groups. And when you looked at me, you saw the hollow man behind the donation total." Lewis turned back to the camera, his face a map of regret. "You asked me for a smile for the kids. You were right to refuse. Because the smile I was selling tonight wasn't for the kids. It was for me. It was to prove Jerry Lewis could still command the room. You didn't just humiliate me, Colonel. You showed me myself. And I didn't like what I saw." He then did the unthinkable. He stepped out from behind the host's desk, the symbolic throne of his power, and sat down in the very guest chair Pembroke had occupied. It was a staggering visual reversal. The king abdicating his throne to sit in the subject's seat. "So, I'm sitting in your chair now, Colonel, and I'm trying to see what you saw. A tired man in a rumpled tuxedo on a bright set. Thinking he's saving the world one joke at a time." He looked into the lens, his connection with the home audience more intimate and powerful than any song or skit had been all night. "I don't know if a man like me can ever understand a man like you. But I am asking you, and I am asking every veteran, every person who serves something bigger than their own ego to forgive my ignorance. Forgive my arrogance. The work tonight is for the kids. That part is real. But the man hosting it, he needed to be taken down a peg. Or 100. He stood up, looking frail and old under the lights. "My response, Colonel, is simply this: thank you. Thank you for your service to this country. And thank you for your service to me tonight. You performed the greatest public service a man could do for another. You told him the truth." Jerry Lewis then walked back to his host position, but he did not sit. He looked at the tote board, now frozen. "The number you see is 1.8 million. That money is real, that help is real. But from this moment on, I promise you this: I will never again confuse the raising of money with the making of a man. The phone lines are open. The need is real. But so is the lesson I learned tonight." He gave a small, genuine, utterly weary smile. The first real smile of the night. "Now, let's get back to work." The impact was seismic. The telethon's final hours were conducted in a completely different tone. Subdued, respectful, focused purely on the cause. The donation phones, after a moment of stunned silence, lit up like a Christmas tree, not with people moved by laughter, but by people moved by a rare, public act of humility from a titan. The segment was replayed on every news network for a week. Editorial pages debated it. Psychologists analyzed it. It became more than a TV moment. It became a cultural parable about ego, service, and the courage to accept a devastating truth. But the story didn't end in Studio 33. 3 days later, a plain, hand-written letter on military-grade stationery arrived at Jerry Lewis's office. It read, "Mr. Lewis, I watched your response. I expected defiance. I expected ridicule. I did not expect what I saw. It is a rare man who can be told he is wrong, especially in front of millions, and not merely admit it, but seek to understand why. What you displayed was not comedy. It was courage of a different order. Perhaps we both serve in our own ways. You have my respect." Semper Fi Call. John R.T. Pembroke, USMC Surrett. Lewis framed that letter. It hung in his private study for the rest of his life, a permanent check on his ego. The following year, Colonel Pembroke appeared again on the telethon, not as a hero of the hour, but as a guest of honor. He and Lewis shared the stage not for an interview, but to present a joint check to the MDA from a veterans' charity Pembroke helped run. They did not joke. They shook hands, a firm, lasting grip that spoke of hard, earned mutual understanding. They became unlikely allies in philanthropy, their partnership lending the telethon a new layer of grit and authenticity it had previously lacked. The night a war hero humiliated Jerry Lewis on Live TV did not break the telethon. It sanctified it. It stripped away the layers of showbiz gloss and revealed the fragile, flawed, but ultimately redeemable human heart at its center. Jerry Lewis's response, a raw, unscripted journey from humiliation to humility, did more than make Colonel Pembroke question his own harsh judgment. It made an entire nation question what true strength looks like. It proved that the greatest act of character is not never falling, but having the courage to examine why you fell and to change your footing forever. That 12-minute exchange, born in public evisceration and culminating in private grace, remains a masterclass in how a single moment of devastating truth, met not with defiance but with vulnerable acceptance, can transform a caricature into a man, and a spectacle into a moment of genuine, enduring humanity. It is the story of how a Marine's uncompromising integrity forged in battle met a comedian's soul in a televised crucible, and how the fire that should have destroyed one man ended up refining them both.